Did you know why Scrum Masters end up pushing work in Jira instead of the teams pulling it? Did you know that only company-managed boards in Jira allow you to set both maximum and minimum work in progress limits? Today we are going to uncover the big backlog configuration secrets between the team and the company-managed projects. Let's go.
In this, we will be covering how to apply the Kanban method to your workflow. Agile defines a specific way of thinking and approaching work. Scrum and Kanban are prominent examples of Agile methods. The Kanban method is an Agile approach to visualize a workflow representing different stages of work. For example, to do, in progress, and done. It manages the flow of tasks to identify bottlenecks or delays. It pulls out the work at different active stages according to resource availability. Last but not least, it focuses on limiting work in progress for efficiency and steady delivery. The session will cover the mechanics of the backlog feature and its use on the Kanban board. Why Kanban? It is very easy to use, highly productive, streamlined, and is very efficient. It involves an iterative and incremental shift to agile ways of working. Kanban is highly beneficial for the following categories of spaces which uses service-oriented workflows like support help desk spaces, bug fix spaces, operations service delivery spaces, infrastructure spaces, and more. Now, Kanban can also be used to create traditional projects with a clear start, end, and defined goal. How do work items or cards flow from one status to another in Jira? A workflow moves work items through stages, defining how a task progresses from being created to being finished. Below is a simple Kanban workflow diagram, which shows how the cards move from one status to another. When QA finds a defect, the item flows back to in progress for rework, enabling rapid feedback and correction within the development cycle. Next is WIP limit. A WIP limit means work in progress limit is a maximum number of items allowed in a workflow state column at one time. For example, if the in progress WIP limit is set to 3, attempting to move or add more than 3 work items into that workflow state column will cause the system to highlight the maximum limit using a predefined color. Why a Kanban board needs WIP limits? If work in progress limits are absent, Kanban becomes start everything, finish nothing. This feature exposes bottlenecks early, improve flow and cycle time, reduce context switching, and increase predictability for the inclusion of new work items. Let's see this with an example by setting up WIP limits. Start simple by defining the workflow. Generally, a software delivery workflow encompasses the following stages. Focus should always be on active work stages, which do not include backlog or done. Next is to assess resource availability as per their skill set. Assume there are 8 developers and 2 QA testers. A good general guideline is to set the work in progress limit at roughly the same number as the individuals performing that role. If the dev in progress stage reaches its capacity limit, developers should prioritize assisting with tasks in the review stage rather than pulling new items from the backlog. In the review stage, review is done by developers themselves. Too many work items here causes pileups. The decision to clear items will be based on a combination of their overall cycle time and their current aging in the present status. For this scenario, we recommend limiting the items in this review state to a maximum of 3 or 4 work items. Our team's QA capacity is currently 2 testers. Each QA can realistically handle 1-2 items at once. When the number of QA testing tasks reaches 3, developers are required to pause the initiation of new projects and instead prioritize assisting the QA team. This assistance involves resolving existing bugs and clarifying requirements to help unblock the QA process. Next stage, ready for release. Work is completed and is currently in a holding pattern awaiting deployment or final sign-off. It is a buffer state, not active work. It's best practice to limit the number of work items to 5 or 6 and monitor them closely, even though there isn't a strict upper limit. Next is pull versus push. Using a Kanban pull system with WIP limits, work flows smoothly as teams pull tasks only into available capacity, boosting focus, reducing bottlenecks, and ensuring a steady delivery of completed work. In our scenario, you can see that QA has capacity, so they pull the next item. The next topic is the push feature. It's important to remember that Kanban doesn't exclusively use pull systems. Push happens at the commitment point, where work moves from a waiting state, backlog, into active work, to do, driven by business needs, signaling a definite start to development. Push is also enforced for urgent work items, which are pushed into the system for emergency work, can bypass work in progress (WIP) limits, and their status and presence must remain transparent. The next section about separating the backlog on a Kanban board. It keeps uncommitted demand separate from work in progress, so the team can focus on finishing instead of constantly starting new work. On a Kanban board, the backlog is not part of the workflow. Kanban needs a separate backlog due to the following reasons. Reason 1. It limits WIP to stabilize flow. When backlog items accumulate on the board, it creates pressure for team members to start them, leading to work in progress, WIP limits being bypassed, and the board becoming a disorganized dumping ground where the continuous flow of work breaks down. Another reason for a separate backlog is that Kanban priorities change often. A backlog is a flexible tool that allows you to easily reorganize priorities whenever necessary, safely add new tasks or remove outdated ones, and defer items for later consideration without disrupting current workflows. The core idea is that because the backlog is managed externally to the board, it requires no WIP limit and no start signal. Consequently, items within it do not interfere with the primary stream of work currently in progress. In the next section, we will review the Cloud Company-Managed Kanban board. This section explores how to configure a Kanban board to use a separate backlog. Adding work items to this column creates a distinct, separate backlog. We will also review how defining the minimum or maximum value for work in progress (WIP) limits will visually emphasize the board columns. We are already aware how to identify the company-managed boards from the team-managed ones, so we know this board falls under the company-managed category. Go to the board and apply a minimum limit of 3 issues to the Dev in Progress column to ensure there are always at least 3 items in that stage. To validate this, verify that this column contains fewer than 3 work items. Once the work item count falls under the work in progress limit, the column is highlighted in yellow. A minimum limit helps guarantee a continuous workflow for the team. Setting a maximum limit on a column restricts the number of work items it can hold. Once the threshold is reached, the column will be highlighted in red. When a new Kanban space is created, the backlog column is automatically included as the initial column on the board. Let's navigate to the board settings and configure the board to use a separate backlog, which can help us set up that separate backlog rather than showing those backlog work items under the backlog column, which we just observed on the board. Currently, no statuses are assigned to the Kanban backlog section, which is left of the columns, meaning the project does not maintain a separate, structured backlog. When one moves an item with a backlog status to the Kanban backlog area, then the recently created backlog column has been removed from the board screen. The backlog column is automatically removed, and the newly configured backlog tab now appears on the screen. A dedicated backlog tab gets added on main space screen and the item is moved over there. The backlog allows for the creation and organization of issues separately without impacting the current board view or workflow. To sequence work, simply drag ready to develop issues to the first column and order them according to priority. Our new issue is now reflected on the board. A separate backlog isolates future work, allowing the team to concentrate solely on items in active development columns. Let's switch to the team-managed Kanban board space. A team-managed Kanban space is designed for individual teams, seeking a simple setup, full control over their workflows and boards, and minimal reliance on Jira administrators. You can configure the maximum WIP limit for any active stage columns by inputting a value into the designated Set Column Limit area. You can also set the WIP limit by navigating to the Columns and Status screen within the Board section. If the Backlog tab is not visible in a team-managed space, it can be enabled by enabling the Backlog feature on the Space Settings screen, as shown. Once a user returns to the board, they will be prompted to decide if they want to move their current items from the to-do column to the backlog section. Select the No Thanks option. No work items from the to-do column will be affected. To show the backlog tab, select the plus icon or more option to add the tab to the main navigation. Create a backlog work item as shown. Now navigate back to the board screen. The newly created backlog work item should not be visible there. Navigate back to the backlog screen. Select the More Actions menu and choose Manage Custom Filters. In the next screen, find the Features option and disable the backlog feature. After disabling the backlog feature, refresh your browser and navigate back to the board screen. The item is automatically moved to the to-do column. To enable the backlog feature, return to the Spaces Settings configuration screen. The system will prompt you again about moving items currently in the to-do column to the backlog section. Select Yes Move this time. Once confirmed, all items from the to-do column will be relocated to the backlog section on the backlog screen. That concludes part 2 of our Agile project management in Jira Cloud. Next, we will explore the Scrum framework and how it aligns with Jira.